Hi everyone, I thought I'd walk you through how I start to paint the page. This is going to be a video that's in a few different parts, so just so you know. I'm going to be using this, which is from Richard Diebenkorn, as my inspiration for the color palette. I don't know if I will keep it entirely this way, but it's how I'm going to start. Before I go to paint, I usually put a barrier cream on my hands. This is called Easy Air Invisible Care, and you just put it on just like it's regular hand cream. What it does is it protects your skin from anything bad, cadmium, chromium, paints like that. I usually do not use paints like that. What I like about it is if you put more of it on your hands before you go to wash your hands, it helps to take the paint off. I've got water in here. My little, can't see it off camera, but I've got this little container that just has nothing but paper towels to clean my brush. I've got a variety of different acrylics. So my Blick matte acrylics, which are inexpensive and one of my favorite brands of inexpensive acrylics. I usually don't like what I always call the cheap craft paints, but these are pretty good. I also have paints like Holbein and then Sennelier, Golden. What I would encourage you to do is pick a few colors, use what you have, don't go out and buy anything special for the class, but all the paints that I'm using are all acrylics. I also have, excuse me, I use one of the little rubber things to open the paint sometimes. This, in case I need it, it is a Mini 01 catalyst tool. I use it for painting and gluing. My brushes, which are the Princeton Select paint brushes that I like to use. They're inexpensive and they come in a variety of different tips and sizes. I went through and I've been using different pieces of cardstock and watercolor paper as my palette. So what I usually do later on is I'll take like a palette knife or something and scrape the paint that I'm not using, and then I can later on collage with this. So FYI if you want to do something like that. So one thing you'll notice is as I go to work, I try to keep my brushes as dry as possible. I like to start with a base coat. So for my base coat, I'm usually using either white, off-white, brown, black, something that will give the paint some tooth to hold on to. I decided before I started that I'm going to paint over my spine. Why? Because I felt like it. So I put the paint on thin. There's no water on the brush. And what I usually do is I start by painting around my focal image. And this is going to act like gesso later on. And the reason why I'm using acrylic as opposed to actually going in and using gesso is that usually gesso, when you use it, obliterates or gets rid of anything that is anything that it covers. And what I like about just using plain old acrylic is that it doesn't do that. You have to build up a few layers of it to be able to totally obliterate what's underneath it. I like to be able to see some of the stuff that's under there. So I'm going to go in and see how I put it on really thin. I tend to do a lot of painting on the side of my brush. Okay. And again, this is what I just have as my base coat. So I'm going to clean my brush, and then all I do to clean my brush is I'll bang the bristles against the bottom of the bucket like this. Wipe off any excess water on the lip of the jar, and then I usually just pounce the brush against the paper towels like this. I do try to keep my brush as dry as possible. The other thing that I like to do is I'll take a dry rag or paper towel. Now you don't want to scrub it. What you do want to do is kind of gently pounce like this, because what happens right now, if I were to go to scrub this, I'm going to wipe the paint right off. So I don't do that. So you'll see me kind of do this every now and then to speed up the drying time. I don't like waiting for things to dry, which is one of the reasons why I like to use acrylics. So again, make sure my brush is dry just with a rag or paper towel. Now, what I would recommend when you go to start is to start by picking 3 colors. I squeezed out every color of the rainbow here, but start with just 3 colors. My little joke is I like to be like the Julia Child of painting, where I'll move the color in and around the page. So I'll start off with a little here in this corner and a little here over in this corner, and then the Julia Child part comes in with a little more sherry up over in this corner. So I like to move the paint in and around the page. Now if I get paint on the focal image, what I usually do is just take the back of my brush or a dry rag or sometimes even a baby wipe and just wipe the paint right off. So see how I'm working and cleaning my brush like that on my little excess scrap piece of paper. So again, remember what I said, I'm going to start with 3 colors and I'm going to brush those 3 colors in and around my page. I'm using that Diebenkorn piece that I showed you earlier as my inspiration. When I go to pick up the paint, you'll notice that I just pick up a little bit. I don't like to have a lot of paint on my brush. Another thing that I tend to try not to worry too much about as I'm painting is, see how when you go to put the color down, it's not as intense or as vibrant as I want it to be. So my little trick is let this dry, and while that's drying I'm going to move to another section. So what you're doing right now is you're building a base and you're just getting the color down to start with. The nice thing about painting with acrylics is it's just like collage. If you don't like what you're doing, you let this dry and you put another color on top of it. So see how I go in and I move the color in and around the page. Right now I don't have any kind of preconceived ideas in my head other than I want to try to use a different color palette than what I normally use. So I'm starting with some different earth tones, which they're usually not my color palette of choice. And that's one of the things that I like to do, is every now and then I'll step outside my comfort zone and try to use different colors and color palettes, color combinations basically, that push me away from the direction that I usually work in. It can be challenging, but to me the whole thing about art making is problem solving and trying to figure out how to not only express myself but also how to approach things in a different way. So I started with the Nicolazzo Gold. Now I've got the deep blue over here. I'm going to give that a minute, let it dry, and I'm going to go in with a different shade of brown. I think this is burnt sienna, yeah. So I don't, like I said before, I don't like it really thick. I tend to put it on as thin as I can get it. I'd rather let it dry and build up the layers. So one thing you'll notice is that it doesn't look perfect or amazing right away. So remember what I said a few minutes ago? All you're doing right now is building a base. So I'm putting down these different colors than what I usually work with, and I'm going to give it some time to dry. and I'm going to go in with another layer or many more layers of color in a few minutes. So for now, I'm going to step away from it for a couple minutes, give it a little bit of time to dry. Again, it's totally outside of my comfort zone color wise. One of my big tricks is that, you know, a lot of the time I'll start a page or my cover, and then instead of waiting and wanting everything to dry really fast, I'll get a base coat of color down just like I did here, get up, get away from it, and come back to it in a couple minutes. A lot of the time all we see is this, what's right in front of us. Get up, move away from it. You can also turn it in different directions to see it from a different perspective. But that's my little trick, is to just leave it alone for a minute, back up, walk away, and come back in a second. See you in 2 minutes.